which are phenomenologically demonstrable.
The self has entered in place of man. With the expression of self, we answer the question concerning the who and human reality. For human reality is singled out by the fact that in its very being it is concerned with its being. This self-reflexive character of human reality can be existentially grasped, which is all that remains of man's power and freedom.
This grasping of one's own existence is, according to Heidegger, the act of philosophizing itself. Philosophical questioning must be existentially exist as a possibility inherent in the being of existent human reality. Philosophy then is the exceptional existential possibility of human reality, which is, in the end, only a reformulation of Aristotle's Hoios Theoreticos of the contemplative life as the highest possibility for man.
This is all the more intensified by the fact that in the Heidegger's philosophy, man is made a kind of summum ens, the master of being, insofar as existence and essence are identical in him. After man was discovered as the being for whom he had so long taken God, it appears that such a being is in fact powerless, and there is no master of being. The only things that remain are anarchical modes of being.
The structures of man's existence. Heidegger calls existential and their structural interrelatedness existentiality. The individual possibility of grasping these existential structures and thereby of existence in an explicit sense, Heidegger calls existential. In this concept of existential, the question never put to rest since Schelling and Kierkegaard, how the universal can be, comes out into the open, together with the answer which had already been given by Kierkegaard.
Man's existence as being in the world. What is at stake for this being in this world is finally nothing else than to maintain himself in the world. And only in the realization of that which will take him away from the world has man the certainty of being himself.
By bringing back reality to the self without the return through man, the question concerning the meaning of being has fundamentally been given up and replaced by the question, obviously more basic to this philosophy, concerning the meaning of the self.
The anticipation of death. Death alone tears him from death, from the context of his fellows, within which he becomes a public person and is hindered from being a self. According to Heidegger, death may indeed be the end of human reality. At the same time, it is the guarantee that nothing matters but myself. With the experience of death as nothingness, I have the chance of devoting myself exclusively to being a self, and once and for all freeing myself from the surrounding world.
The self as a conscience has put itself in place of humanity, and the being of the self in place of the being of man.
Psychologie, the Weltanschauung. Jaspers presents and relativizes all philosophical systems as mythologizing structures, in which man seeking protection flees before the little questions of his existence. In extreme situations, he seeks to project a new type of philosophizing, in which he invokes Kierkegaard and Nietzsche This new philosophizing will, above all, fetch nothing. It will be rather a perpetual shaking up, a perpetual appeal to the powers of life in oneself and others.
Jaspers places himself in the revolt fundamental to the new philosophy of the philosophers against philosophy. He seeks to resolve philosophy in philosophizing and to find ways in which philosophical results can be so communicated that they lose their character as results. One of the principal problems of this philosophy becomes therefore the question of communicability generally.
Existence for Jaspers is no form of being, but a form of human freedom, and indeed the form in which man, as possibility of his spontaneity, turns against his mere being a result. Man's being as such and as given is not existence, but man is in his human reality, possible existence. Thus the word existence expresses the meaning that only insofar as man moves in the freedom that rests upon his own spontaneity and is directed his communication to the freedom of others is the reality for him.
Thus, the question concerning that of reality, which cannot be resolved into thought, acquires a new meaning without losing its character as real. The that of being as the given, whether as the reality of the world, as the incalculability of one's fellowmen, or the fact that have not created, self becomes the background against which man's freedom emerges, becomes at the same time the stop which kindles it. It cannot resolve the real to the object of thought, becomes the triumph of possible freedom. In this context, the question concerning the meaning of being can be so suspended that the answer to it runs: being is such that its human reality is possible.
Jaspers brought into suspense by passing beyond all knowledge of the world, which would fix being. Philosophizing sounds that the appeal to my freedom and creates the space for an unconditioned deed that would be invoked, the transcendence. In Jasper's thinking as the function of leading man to determine experience in which thought itself fails, in foundering of thought, thought of man, who is more than thought, because more real and more free. Experience what Jasper calls the cipher of transcendence. The transcendence is experienced as a cipher only in foundering. It is itself a sign of existence, which is aware not only that as human reality it has not created itself, but that as human reality it is helplessly surrendered to inevitable destruction, but also even as freedom it is not indebted to it alone. The transcendence is experienced in failure, is a sign of limitation of human existence.
Jasper holds that in philosophy, every ontology claiming it can say what being really is a slipping away into the absolutizing of particular categories of being. The existential meaning of such slipping away would be that such a philosophy robs man of a freedom which can persist only so long as man does not know what being really is.
In this failure of man, experience the fact that he can neither know nor create being, and that thus he is not God. In this experience, he realized the limitation of his existence, the limits of which he tries to trace in philosophizing. In the failing of transcendence of all limits, he experienced reality given to him, as the cipher of a being which he himself is not.
The task of philosophy is to free man from the illusory world of the pure object of thought, and let him find his way home to reality. Philosophic thought can never cancel the fact that reality cannot be resolved into the thinkable. Its job is rather to aggravate this unthinkability.
So being as such is not knowable. It is to be experienced only as something surrounding us. Therefore, the very ancient search for an ontology is liquidated. With the liberation of this world from the ghost of being and the illusion of being able to understand it, there disappeared the necessity of having to explain it monastically from one principle, namely, from this all-pervasive substance, which the discordance of being, where this being does not mean that being of ontologies, can be admitted, and the modern feeling of alienation in the world can be taken into account, as well as the modern will to create a human world which can be a home within a world which is no longer a home. It is as if with this concept of being, as that which surrounds us in fluid contour there were traced an island on which man, unmenaced by dark, unknowable. Preceding them, he can illuminate his existence, trace out what he can and cannot do, and thereby from mere being as a result, pass to existence, in which Jaspers is only another, and more explicitly, word or being, a man. Existence itself is never essentially isolated. It is only in communication and the knowable of the existence of others. And its existence can develop only in the togetherness of men in the common given world. And in the concept of communication, there lies embedded, though not fully developed, a new concept of humanity as the condition for man's existence.
Through the essentially human movement of transcendence through thought, and of the failure of thought bound up with this, we at least arrive at the conclusion that man is master of his thoughts.
As Hannah Arendt concluded, the first man's nature is to be more than himself and to will more than himself.
Thank you for listening. Have a good
Good existence.
existence.